morning, everybody. I'm John DeLallo with Veterans Breakfast Club, and today we're talking to Brian Ashbaugh, United States Army, Corps of Engineers, 1966 until 1987. Good morning, Brian. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
Brian, let's get right to it. I see that you were a career man in the Corps of Engineers, and it appears that you went in just as Vietnam was really building up. Now, did you go in through with the officer corps or enlisted?
Well, I technically think I went on active duty before Vietnam built up. It's just that I didn't get credit for it. I entered the United States Military Academy at West Point on July 1st, 1962.
Aha, excellent.
And I graduated June 8th, 1966, when I was commissioned as a second lieutenant.
Beautiful. And you got to Vietnam, yes?
I did. My first couple of assignments were they sent me to Ranger School and Airborne School at Fort Benning.
Good Lord. I thought all engineers did was build stuff up and blow stuff up.
Well, they did something different with my class. They did not send us to the officer basic course. They decided they would send us all to Ranger School, which might have been fine for infantry officers, but it really was a detriment for engineer officers.
Sounds a little bit strange, actually, and I'm inclined to agree with you. I've known some combat engineers. Obviously, I'm oversimplifying, but as they said in the movie in Full Metal Jacket, engineers, you find mines and blow stuff up, and I'm sure your duties entailed a lot more than that while you were in country.
Yeah, well, my first assignment was to Karlsruhe, Germany. And I got there in early December 1966 after Airborne and Ranger School. I was assigned to the 249th Engineer Battalion, which was a construction battalion, Company B. And I was there about a week or 10 days, and they made my company commander the Battalion S3. That left me and one other second lieutenant in the company, plus a warrant officer. I was the senior second lieutenant, so my first assignment was as a company commander.
As a brand new butter bar.
I had about 230 men in the company.
Oh my God! And you had your commission for how many weeks, days, months?
6 months.
6 months, and you're already company commander.
Yes.
Damn. The Army works in mysterious ways, no?
It was an experience. We obviously had construction projects in both in the area and some that were a little further away. In fact, one that went on for even after I left, I got a call from the S3 one Thursday morning. He said, "Can you go with me to a meeting tomorrow?" And I said, "Sure." So we go to a little town of Münster, which was just east of Darmstadt, and we're in this meeting, and the United States Army Europe engineer is there, Brigadier General. And a bunch of other, a couple of high-ranking civilians and some others. And this was a special weapons storage site that had flunked their Defense Atomic Support Agency inspection, which was not a good thing.
No, I worked with nukes for a short period of time, and no, it's not a good thing to fail an inspection when you're working with nukes.
Yeah, so they basically had no money but they could provide TDY funds and funds for fuel. So the problems were the fence around this facility had holes in it big enough to drive a deuce and a half through. The perimeter road was impassable in some places. 2 of the 7 guard towers were condemned, and they'd gotten the Forestmeister in to make a clear zone, but it didn't meet the criteria because there were stumps, and they needed to get the clear zone reasonably leveled out, so you had to clear and grub the tree stumps. And they wanted to know if I could have a platoon on site on Monday.
Oh my goodness. Let me ask you one question, Brian, before I get too far afield here. You know, I'm a retired Air Force, and of course you're retired Army. So for the benefit of our viewing audience, what is an S3?
An S3?
Yes, you had mentioned that you're one
of
the
operations officer. He's like at battalion, you have a battalion commander, an executive officer. The S1 is personnel, the S2 is intelligence, the S3 is operations, and the S4 is supply.
Ah, outstanding. Thank you for that.
Okay, so we got the platoon there on Monday. We had to get convoy clearances and all kinds of other stuff to get our equipment there, and they were to start working in the clear zone. And that project must have started in the somewhat early in 1967, and it continued on past after I left in May of '68. So eventually they got funding. We rebuilt the guard towers, replaced the fence. And one other interesting thing is that there were 5 ammunition bunkers in the clear zone that had been German ammunition bunkers that had been blown in World War II, full of ammunition. Needless to say, that doesn't explode the ammunition.
It buries it, exactly.
And we could walk around there and find where the cases had rusted away, and there were 40 millimeter white phosphorus rounds and some other things like that still packed in cosmoline. We were to stay out of that area, but eventually we got permission to dig down alongside the bunker and collapse what was left of the bunker into the hole. And we had EOD, the explosive ordnance disposal people in there. And they took out 3.5 tons of ammunition.
Wow. I guess the Germans were ready from the standpoint of ammunition. They just couldn't get it to the front.
Well, my platoon leader there said one day this colonel came by and he was really interested in what they were doing with the bunkers. He said he was involved in blowing them. Fortunately, my platoon leader restrained himself.
Outstanding. So moving on from Germany, and it sounds like you had a lot of excitement right there.
Yeah.
How long did it take you to get to the Republic of Vietnam?
Well, in the promotion scheme in the Army at that time was you made first lieutenant after 1 year, you made captain after another year. So coming up on June of '68, I got orders for Vietnam, and I left in May of '68 along with another one of my classmates who was also a company commander in the battalion. We were basically a battalion full of second lieutenants. My classmate and I and our wives, and I had about a 5-month-old son, came back, and the Army was buying like 400 passages on the SS United States. So we came back on the ship, the SS United States.
I wish I would have, but somebody failed to tell me that I had an option when I returned from my Vietnam tour of either coming by air or by cruise ship. And and by the time they told me, it was far too late. Thankfully, Northwest got us home.
So then I had about a month's leave, and so in June I flew to Vietnam. My orders, and my orders weren't changed, but my orders were to the Fourth Engineer Battalion, Fourth Infantry Division, which was located at Campanari, which is near Placou in the Central Highlands.
Now, during your time in Vietnam, again, going back to the movies of all the terrible references, again, my experience in talking to combat engineers, there are a lot of mine clearing going on, and you guys worked hand in hand, obviously, with explosive ordnance detachments or explosive ordnance disposal people, as well as bridge building and clearing out landing zones and so on and so forth. And I'm guessing that you had lots to do when you were in country.
I did, although my first assignment was, I think the technical name was liaison officer in the office of the assistant division engineer. We had an office at division headquarters, and my job there was basically there were controls involved in whatever construction was going on the division base camp. I mean, you had to get approval for building a barracks, say, for one of the tenant units. And my job was to prepare that paperwork and also go around the base and make sure people weren't building things that they didn't have authority to build. Essentially a code enforcement officer. So I had that job for about 3 months. And included in that, they had a task force of a brigade, an augmented brigade that they sent to Bami-Tuot, which is south of Placou. And I went down there as a task force engineer. They were doing some operations in that area. I did, this would have been probably September or so of 1968. One of the things that I had to do is that they wanted a route reconnaissance of a road running from Bami-Tuot basically out almost to the Cambodian border, where there was a special forces camp. So there was a major bridge across the river in Bami-Tuot, and they wanted an evaluation of that, and I went there on the ground, and it was a through truss type of bridge, except that it wasn't steel, it was concrete.
Oh my!
And there was no way to evaluate the strength of it, and there was damage to the abutment on the one end that they had shored up. And basically about the only thing I could do was watch, and I saw deuce and a halves cross it, and I figured that was about the weight limit. Also, I think there was a width restriction that probably restricted it to deuce and a half. And then I had a platoon of air cav or infantry with me as I made the route reconnaissance, and we landed at different places where there were streams or crossing the road, or where I had to evaluate the fording capabilities or the bridge capabilities and the roadway condition. So I did that. After that.
Yeah, this was in 68. And
yes.
You guys were operating in Cambodia already?
No, this was before anybody went into Cambodia. It was that, but this may have been preparation for that. I don't know. They didn't tell me why they wanted the route reconnaissance.
Well, there were a lot of bad maps, Brian.
I can only surmise. So after that, when I came back to the division headquarters, why there was an opening for a company commander, the Charlie Company, which at the time was the rear company was basically in the division base camp, and they were doing construction projects throughout the base camp. You know, culvert work, head wall work, and that sort of thing. And then they were going to switch brigades around, and so my company was assigned to support the 2nd Brigade, which was moving to Kontum, which is north of Placou, between Placou and Dak To in the Central Highlands. And we had an engineering mission to go with. There was a section of the Ho Chi Minh Trail that crossed Vietnam out to the west. The engineer mission was to destroy the section of the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I wrote the engineer annex to the operations order for that. It was the 2nd Brigade's responsibility. They had one infantry battalion that they put on a fire support base with an artillery battery of 105 howitzers to provide the coverage for the operation. I put one platoon in on the southern end of the trail. They were secured by a rough puff unit, a rural force, poplar force of indigenous, I think, mountain yard troops. I had another platoon from another company who was put in on the northern end, and they were secured by an American infantry company. The northern company, their major obstacle that they had trained for was to put in an abattis. This may be the only abattis that was ever put in Vietnam, but an abattis is you go in and you fall the trees so that they interlock, and makes it very difficult to remove the obstacle on the roadway.
Wow.
And none of our engineer manuals prepared for this, because these were mahogany trees, and our formulas for blowing them down didn't work, so the platoon had to train for that. We had analyzed the aerial photographs of the trail with the platoon leaders and tried to pick out some natural obstacles and where they could put in some kind of an obstacle to tie into those natural obstacles. But pretty much the platoon leaders were told to use your imagination. We had resupply explosives that we could kick out of the helicopters because they were, C4 is pretty inert explosive. All the platoon leaders had to do was make sure they had enough blasting caps and the like. But we did what they found was there were you could tell the roadway was basically done with manual labor. They had side hill cuts, they had guardrails along the roadway, they had wooden bridges just under the level of the stream so you couldn't detect them from the air. We blew a bunch of those up, blew up roadways with cratering charges. They had a bunker every 50 meters. We hung a paper bag of persistent CS gas, basically powdered CS gas, in there with a quarter-pound block of TNT and blew it so that it impregnated the inside of the bunker, and that would pretty much last for 6 months.
Now, Brian, one question that pops into my mind. You talked about working with the Montagnards and working, of course, with American infantry. Where were our South Vietnamese allies during your operations?
We didn't work with any of the South Vietnamese Army. And frankly, only the operation with the Rough Puffs on the southern end, that was the only connection we had with working with any of the other indigenous forces was this operation. So the operation was going along smoothly. We weren't getting any attacks or anything, but we were falling behind, and I had a platoon with the artillery battery and the battalion headquarters out on the fire support base. So I ended up putting them down in the middle of the Ho Chi Minh Trail to work on that. I ended up with a problem a couple of days before I put them in. My platoon leader called me on the radio and he said, "You know that puppy we have?" And I said, "Yeah." He says, "Well, the artillery had a dog here that ended up being diagnosed with rabies. Now, our puppy was too young to get a rabies shot. What should we do?" So you never know what kind of issues you're gonna run into. So I go to the brigade surgeon and he says, "Well, they'll have to kill the puppy and send the body back and we'll test it." So they do that. The surgeon calls me and he says, "Well, the puppy tested positive for rabies." Well, the dog hadn't bit anybody, but we're out there clearing fields of fire and people have nicks and cuts on their hand. The dog licked them. I said, "Okay, so what do we do?" He says, "You have to have a board of 3 doctors, 2 of whom say they have to get rabies shots." By this time, the platoon is on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. I says, "Well, I need a board of doctors to go with me to the Ho Chi Minh Trail." And I actually took 2 doctors and landed on the Ho Chi Minh Trail. And they interviewed everybody in this platoon. And I had to pull them out. Everybody but one had to get rabies shots. And I had to put another platoon in.
God.
the one that didn't get the rabies shot was the platoon leader. He said, you know, I didn't think I had anything to do with the dog, but I sweated that for the incubation period. So
nobody likes shots.
Yeah, so that operation came off, no casualties, no adverse enemy action or anything. So after that, then I had typically a platoon would support an infantry battalion, and they would be out on the fire support base typically with the battalion headquarters, and they would generally have an artillery battery. I generally had one platoon in the brigade fire support base, and because we had just moved into this fire support base, why they were building roadways, they were building perimeter bunkers. We set up a system of where I'd put a couple of my troops with folks from the units that were responsible for a section of the perimeter to guide them on installing barbed wire obstacles and setting up claymores and that sort of thing for security. We built, in addition to the perimeter bunkers, we built guard towers every so often, also where you could see a lot farther out. I also had a responsibility this whole time for doing minesweeping operations on a road from Khartoum out toward, there was a special forces camp to the west that was one of the supply points for the operation out to the west. So that operation, the main supply road was paved, so you didn't have to sweep that. But this road was basically a gravel road, and when you do the minesweeping operations, we had what's called a mine roller, which were like was mounted on the front of a tank with these arms that had like tank road wheels on them, and you could run that down the road at a pretty good speed, and if there was a mine there, it would set it off. Problem is, if you hit a mine with it, it probably took a week to 10 days to repair it. So we only used that in areas where we didn't expect to find a mine. The areas where we thought we might find them, why we had people out with minesweepers, and typically you would try to use the same person sweeping the road, because a lot of mines are detected visually, not even with the mine detectors, just because you can see changes in the roadway where they had dug in.
Now this was pretty much a constant process.
Every morning.
You didn't sweep it once and then, okay, it's good.
No, every morning you had to go out and sweep it.
Yeah, I had a good friend of mine, and as an enlisted man, that was his job, to go out and find mines. And he survived a year of finding mines, so God bless him for that. And he told me that he found a lot of them.
Yeah, the other thing that I was responsible for was providing potable water to the brigade. I had a water purification unit, which we set up out on a river, and this is outside the perimeter of the brigade support base, and then we'd have to leave that every night and go in the morning, and they'd have to go in and check for booby traps. Eventually, we diverted a stream in through the perimeter, and were able to set up the water purification unit inside the brigade support base perimeter. And we also built a nice level platform that they brought in a shower unit, so that when they would bring one of the battalions in for a little bit of rest, while they had a shower unit there, and they'd come in and get cleaned up.
Now, when did you leave, or better said, how many months were you in country?
I was in country 12 months.
And did you do a second tour, or just the one?
I did not.
Okay, don't blame you.
I guess there was somewhat of a reason for that, but which I'll explain. But let me tell you about one other thing that happened.
Yes, please.
At Khartoum that was interesting. So, because we were a tenant unit on the brigade support base, I had to man one of the perimeter bunkers. So I had each night we had 3 people in there. During the day, I think that you just had to have one. But this one night, in the middle of the night, like 2 o'clock in the morning, one of my people from this from this bunker came in and woke me up, and he said, "There's a fire." And I go out, and it's up in the vicinity of the fuel supply point, and the flames are 200 feet in the air. Fortunately, we had a big pile of sand that we were used for projects, and we get everybody up. They start loading our dump trucks with sand. We load a bulldozer, take it around the other way, and get up there. And there was a 20,000 or 10,000 gallon bladder of diesel fuel that somebody had hit a handheld flare, and it came down and burned through and set this bladder on fire. The forward support element that ran this had we had built dikes around it to contain the fuel if there was a spill, but they had run the pipes through the dike. As a result, when it burned out, while the fuel ran down through their area and burned up everything, and was heading toward the artillery area. And that's where we put the bulldozer, and he's basically pushing flames back up the hill. Next to the 10,000 gallon bladder of diesel fuel was another 10,000 gallon bladder of diesel fuel and a 10,000 gallon bladder of gasoline. Fortunately, we were able to put out the fire without either of those other two going up. So
that would have been a disaster. Yeah. I think is a pretty nice way of putting it.
The brigade commander, I'll think of his name in a minute here, asked me what if I was going to put people in for an award. I told him I was, and I asked him what he recommended. He says a Bronze Star. So I put all these people in for Bronze Stars, and I put the dozer operator in for Soldier's Medal. They get back to my battalion commander, and he downgrades them all to Army Commendation Medals. They then went to the Chief of Staff of the Army. By this time, that brigade commander was the Chief of Staff of the division, and he put them all back up to Bronze Stars. So I was able to award 17 Bronze Stars and a Soldier's Medal one day.
18 awards for that.
Yes.
For that one.
Yes.
One very, very, very brave action. Outstanding.
They were running company commander tours for about 6 months. So my 6 months was up. I still had about 3 months left. So I went back and became the battalion S4, the supply officer. And then I finished out my tour, and my next assignment, they sent me to grad school in civil engineering at University of Missouri Rolla, which is now Missouri Science and Technology. So I was there a year, and then they sent me to the engineer officer advanced course at Fort Belvoir, which was basically another year. And then I had to have a utilization tour for my master's degree. So I ended up as a project officer with the Sacramento Engineer District, but I was assigned to Fort Lewis, Washington.
You got around a little bit during your career, and from the dates, I assume you're retired Army, correct?
I did 11 years active duty and 10 in the reserves. So I retired basically from the reserves at that point.
Right. Well, I did the same thing. I did 6 active and 14 in the Guard because, quite frankly, once the war was over, active duty wasn't a whole lot of fun anymore.
So I did 2 years at Fort Lewis, basically as a project officer. I coordinated some 9 design projects and inspected ongoing construction projects. And then my next assignment was to Colorado School of Mines as an ROTC instructor. I was there for 4 years, and during my time there, I went to law school at night. And that's when I got in 1977, I got off active duty and came to Pittsburgh, which was where the job was. I went to work for a law firm that eventually, the name changed 2 or 3 times, but it eventually was Rose Schmidt, Hazley, and DeSalle. And I was there for 24 years, and then I went to another law firm, Blumling and Gusky, and was there for 13 years before I retired.
When you were in the Army Reserve, or Army National Reserve or Guard?
I was in the reserves. There was an engineer battalion in Uniontown, the 429th Engineer Battalion, and I served there as I guess I was the S4 for a little while, and I was a civil engineer. And then eventually I got promoted, and there wasn't a slot for me there, but they had just stood up an engineer group, the 308th Engineer Group, which was in Pittsburgh. And I went up there as the supply officer, the S4. I was there for a year, and then I went back to the 429th as the executive officer. And eventually, after a couple of years there, I ended up at the 99th Army Command at Oakdale as the engineer. And that's, I was there about 4 years, and then I retired.
Did you serve with a real good friend of mine that was with 99th ARCOM? He was their Judge Advocate General, a fellow named Bill Ivel.
I know the name. I didn't really have any connection with him, though.
Yeah, he was our district magistrate over in Mount Lebanon for a number of years, and unfortunately, he came to a bad end in an automobile crash up in the Laurel Mountains.
Oh, that's why I know him, because I used to live in Mount Lebanon. I remember, yeah, and then the fellow that took his place was I knew him pretty well. Was a former police officer, not a lawyer.
Now you ended up with a law degree as well.
Yes.
Excellent. Outstanding. Sounds like a very interesting career.
Yeah, and I ended up, with my engineering background, I ended up practicing construction law for my for my legal career.
I have no doubt. Well, Brian, it's been just absolutely marvelous talking to you, and your stories, particularly in country, are boy, that's the stuff that legends are made of. And I'm very, very pleased to hear that you had the opportunity to recognize the very brave contribution of those guys with, that fought a hell of a battle with nothing but dump trucks and sand. That's a big deal.
Yes, I was very proud of those people.
As well you should be. The forum is yours, obviously. We're telling your story, not mine. Any closing thoughts?
They just an interesting little sidelight in how I ended up getting into the Army. Back in 1956, 57 timeframe, I'm in junior high. And I had nobody in my family in the military that I was aware of at that time. I subsequently found out my great-great-grandfather was in the Civil War, but
oh my!
But I had no military connection. So, but there was a TV show on television called West Point, and it ran for about 2 years, and that's probably the thing that motivated me to want to go to West Point. It was interesting. A lot of it was filmed at West Point. The cadets were extras, but they had some young actors that played the principal cadets in the different, and each show was different, and that they all kind of had a moral story with them. But some of the actors that were in it were Steve McQueen, Chuck Connors, Martin Milner from 1 Adam 12.
Yes, and from Route 66. Yes, absolutely.
Leonard Hagman. I'm sorry, Leonard Nimoy, Larry Hagman. Barbara Eaton was a cadet girlfriend. Robert Vaughn, and Clint Eastwood.
Now there's a who's who for you. And I can understand why that would have motivated you to take a look at West Point.
About 5 years ago, they apparently converted these to DVDs, and I was able to buy the set on Amazon. So that was the thing that motivated me to want to go to West Point.
That's outstanding. We could probably continue this for another hour. Again, a sterling career, very, very interesting, and it was not uncommon, for guys to get out of active duty and get into a guard or a reserve unit. I know a lot of guys just like me, 6, 7, 8 years active, and National Guard to complete 20 years, and it was time well spent, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, and the retirement and the benefits that when you get the Social Security and Medicare, the TRICARE for Life is definitely a worthwhile benefit.
Well, exactly, and that was going to be my wrap-up question. Let's assume for the moment that you're talking to a classroom of high school seniors, 18 years old, maybe at the max, most of them 17. What would your advice be to these kids today, since now we have an all-volunteer military, and we don't have to fear for the draft as you and I did? What would you tell this classroom of high school seniors today?
Well, I think I would say, if your plans are to go to college, consider joining the ROTC program. be it Army, Navy, Air Force, or Marines, you know, whatever they offer. I said, my grandson went to Penn State and on an ROTC scholarship. And I know from teaching ROTC, that's by far the best scholarship at any university. And he went there on a 3-year scholarship. He's in the reserves now. He never had to go on active duty other than to go to the officer basic course. But I think it was a good experience for him. That's what I would mention to people who are thinking about going to college. People who are maybe not ready to go to college, you might consider that, particularly if you are a little immature and don't know what you want to do. Maybe join one of the armed forces and have an opportunity to go to some interesting places and grow up a little bit. Plus, if you then decide you want to go to college, you've got benefits that come out of that, the GI Bill or whatever the current procedure is on.
Yeah. I finished up my 4-year degree on the GI Bill after blowing a academic scholarship, but that's a story for another day. So, folks, we've been talking with Brian Ashbaugh. Brian is a veteran, Vietnam veteran. Brian had an opportunity to build things up and to blow things up, and went on to have a very fulfilling career as an attorney, specializing in construction. And it's been an honor, sir, speaking to you. And on behalf of Veterans Breakfast Club, I sure want to thank you, and particularly thank you for your sage advice for these kids who are, on the fence as to service, to our wonderful republic.
Thank you for allowing me to participate in